Hi, and welcome to WQMD. I'm Shenay O'Brien. The first transgender procedure was performed in 1968 in the US. 50 years on, transgender individuals are still struggling to find their space in society and to be treated rightful and equally. Landa is a truly remarkable individual. Born female, he realizes from a very early age that he doesn't identify and relate to his female form. Author of the book Becoming Him, Landa becomes a resounding and inspirational voice, laying bare his tortured world of being trapped inside the wrong body and his ultimate transition from female to male. Landa, welcome to WQMD.
Thank you for having me.
Trans in South Africa is still a very, very touchy subject. And to write a book about it takes a lot of courage. Why Becoming Him?
So I think I needed to tell my story. Like you said, I mean, the first procedure was in the 60s in the US. And up until now, human beings can't be who they are. And I think for me, it was my transition journey has been amazing. I've been privileged enough to have access. I've been able to get medical aid to pay. So I needed to use that privilege to serve others. So the real reason why I told my story is so that others can find my journey and use it to serve themselves, and hopefully they can get to then becoming who they truly are. And so that others can get to know that being transgender is all right.
It is
being
okay.
Human, it's part of being who you are.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the reason.
Talking about medical aid, you say I read an article about you where you worked for Discovery and they refused to pay for your treatments. You were the first transgender, I think, ever to get a medical aid in South Africa to pay for your procedures.
So yeah, I say I'm the first known, because you can never know with medical aids. Yeah, I was working for them for a good number of years. I wrote, my initial motivations were to them. They didn't even respond to me. But because I think they're the biggest, every other scheme sort of takes their lead from them. So they didn't even respond to me, and yeah, I never heard any feedback from them until I switched over to BankMed and I motivated there. They initially declined me, and then I picked up the phone and asked them, why are you declining? No, it's not medically necessary, it's cosmetic surgery. And I'm like, but how can you say that? Especially having these motivations from specialists. And then after that, I asked them to actually speak to my surgeon, and they spoke to him, and that's how I got to get the victory. So if it was a scheme or someone who wasn't even willing to hear me, I probably wouldn't have gotten that victory.
So I have a question. So basically, anyone who doesn't have medical aid, who would love to transition, how would they go about it? Is it easier? Is there any other way of transition, a healthy way to transition without medical aid?
Yeah, so thank you for that. It's a very good question. So in South Africa, we've got 2 transgender clinics that are linked to public health care. So we've got the one in Cape Town, which is the transgender clinic at Groote Schuur Hospital. Then we've got one at Steve Biko Academic here in Joburg. Now, there are only 2 doctors who are surgeons or plastic surgeons who can perform any of the physical procedures that you need to align yourself to who you are, be you a trans man or trans woman, or a non-binary person who just wants to align their body to who they are. Yeah. So having only 2 clinics in the whole country, it results in a waiting period of between 21 and 27 years.
No.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons that pushed me to actually try and push medical aids to pay. Because in South Africa, if you are formally employed, chances are medical aid is a condition of employment, because these companies have got sort of contracts with medical aids, and you will find that most of them are linked to either one of the 4 or 2 big medical aids in the country. So it's either private is on a case by case in some instances, but if you're going through the public health route, then you're going to wait at least 21 years to get one of your surgeries.
Surely that is not okay.
That is not okay. But I mean, it is also a very expensive venture.
It is. It's very expensive. I mean, for an example, when I had my top surgery, which is the double mastectomy, I was quoted at the time 48,000 rand. And I mean, that was in what, 2009, 2010?
Gotcha.
So, and I mean, at the time I was still quoted close to private rates because of my salary. So even in the public health space, they look at your salary and then they quote you based on that. So if you can afford, if your salary is between 0 and 6,000 rand, I believe, then you pay private rates. And so it's ridiculous. There's no access to healthcare for transgender people at all.
Landa, you said something very interesting that it's sitting with me. You mentioned there's the physical element, and then you mentioned as well there is the mental and the personal, the emotion.
Yeah.
What is that about, and how did that start for you?
So I think that's the part that you always carry with you as a human being, because we are born and we are assigned gender, we are given names, and somehow society feels entitled to you not being allowed to even give yourself a name. So the psychological element, that's where it starts.
Yes.
Because you're being socialized into something that everyone wants you to be. Okay. It almost reminds me of the quote by Paulo Coelho: everyone seems to have a clear idea of how others ought to live their lives, but none about his or her own. So from a young age, you become, I mean, from as young as 7, I can remember being in this body, and I couldn't relate to this female form, but I'm being raised in a home where I'm being socialized and groomed to align to this form, because I was assigned a gender at birth, right? So, and then that's where it starts denting the psychological and emotional part of who you are, because everything about you doesn't speak to what everyone else tells you who you ought to be. And for me, it took a while until I actually got to university, and that's when I had a hectic nervous breakdown, attempted suicide, and after that, I actually got to speak to my psychologist and tell her what was actually going on with me. And so that's when I could actually quantify it into words with someone. That's when I actually started feeling a measure of relief, and then a couple of years later, I actually Googled, what does it feel like to feel like a man but be born in a woman's body? And that's when I actually, for the first time, this was 2006-07, for the first time I actually saw what it means to be transgender in terms of actual literature.
Yes.
So it starts at a very young age. That's the biggest hurdle and battle for most people who identify as transgender, because there's no language chances, there's no knowledge, there's no understanding from the home level, and you battle with that every single day. Your mind is like, but you're not this thing that everyone tells you you are. Yes. And that's the fight, that's the hectic
internal challenge.
But do you ever think we'll reach a point in South Africa and our society where trans visibility will be humanized? Where we're not seen as, or where transgender people are not seen as outsiders or alien?
I hope we will. And the reason why I hope we will is because we've got such beautiful legislation. We've got a constitution that allows you to be who you are. We didn't need to get a constitution to tell us who we are. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But because we do have that, and I'm hoping that, I mean, the other day I was on radio and we were talking about changing the gender marker. I was very fortunate in terms of my gender marker change, because I had my new ID within about 8 weeks.
Oh, wow.
There are people who wait up to 2, 3, 4 years for that. And that's because Home Affairs does not standardize their operating procedures, but the law says
absolutely
it should be like that.
It's contradicting itself.
So I'm hoping we get to that point. I'm hoping we get officials into those spaces that actually know how to apply the law and not personalize your journey for you, because your perception or understanding or your opinion of me doesn't change who I am. And if I'm coming to you as a Home Affairs official and asking you to process my documentation, it shouldn't be up to you whether or not you feel like you should or ridicule me or and. So I'm hoping the implementers of our law will get to a point where they can actually implement the law for what it is, and get to a point where they can start seeing human beings for being human first.
Landa, so I want to ask you quickly, how do you know, what's the difference between this and a sexual preference? And then how did you know this is not permanent or a phase? How did you determine that it's a permanent thing that you're going to do for your life?
So, firstly, there's a difference between gender and sex. I think earlier on I spoke about the language, and that's where a lot of people get lost. We are born, we are assigned gender based on our sexual, physical, biological selves.
Yes.
And now there's a difference between the two. There's physical sex, which is your genitals, and then there's gender, which is your identity, the core of who you are.
Okay.
So the two are very distinct, which is why you find that there's some people who don't even ascribe themselves to either male or female. They are non-binary because they do not identify with any of these man-made terminologies and sort of social constructs in terms of what gender is. I believe gender is a performance. We are socialized and therefore we perform according to what we've been told until you get to a point where you align yourself with who you are.
Okay.
Number two, how did I know? I mean, I've always known myself. As a young child, I had a conversation with my grandmother when she was 90. This was in 2010, and I'd already begun taking my hormone therapy. And when I told her that I'm going to be undergoing a physical alignment to the core of who I am, she said to me, it was not for her to accept or reject me. She's always known who I am. I know myself. And obviously I have spent a lot of time, because nobody goes out of their way to choose a life that is going to result in them being frustrated and compromised intentionally. So when she said that to me, I realized that she's probably seen me from when I was young. But even when I was young, I used to get bought Barbie dolls, and I used to just dismember them because I didn't identify with that, because that was a gender, a construct, right? And even going to school, I used to fight with my aunt because she used to insist on, there was a certain dress you needed to wear, dresses, but because I couldn't wear my preferred clothing, we had to sit down and say, okay, cool. So I was very vocal from a young age, and I knew that. And even growing up, there was a point where I identified as a butch lesbian. And I was very butch, very, very butch. But I knew that I'm not a female. I know that. I feel it, I know it. It doesn't relate to who I am. And until I actually began, and hence the name Becoming, because I feel as human beings, we continuously become.
Forever.
That's why Michelle Obama stole my title. We evolve. None of us are where we were 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
But in my becoming, I've always been him. So I've always known. It's just that I might not have had the language or the way of expressing it within the spaces I was born and raised in and had to move in. But I've always known myself to be who I am.
And then, what's the first step in transitioning?
So the journey is different for everyone. And I always say this because what works for me is not going to work for the next person. Which is why I always say, even in writing this book, this is my personal journey, but if it can help someone else, then I hope it does. So for me, the first step was changing my first name. I broke it down because we were dealing with lay people at Home Affairs who don't know and who might have opinions about you, So I broke it down. In South Africa, you don't need a reason to change your first name. You can go to Home Affairs tomorrow and have 10 first names. If they can fit into your ID book, they will change it for you. So that was my first step. Second step was the gender marker. I had listened and heard people talk about their experiences. People being forced to go into rooms and strip for them to see their genitals. Yeah. I had heard people were ridiculed. Human beings they thrive in belittling someone, especially when there's an audience. Human beings who had gone through that. And so what I did is I chose a Home Affairs that was pretty new in Cape Town where I stayed. It was the Wynberg Home Affairs at the time. Very young staff, and I went in there with a hope, a wing and a prayer, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this now. And I went in there with my phone on record because I was ready for it. And if I needed to go to court, then I was going to go to court. And I was helped by this gentleman. And funny enough, this is the thing about being human. I had hoped to be held by a female because I thought it would be easier to have a conversation with her. And I was helped by this gentleman, and I went in with my back up. And I could see that he didn't understand what was going on. He kept asking me questions. I kept referring him to the form because you need 2 letters, one from a specialist who is primarily involved in your transition. So it can be a hormone, a doctor, which is called an endocrinologist. It can be your plastic surgeon, someone who can confirm that you are actually on the journey, and a second letter from your general practitioner, for example, or your psychologist, just to corroborate the other letter. So I went in with the 2 letters from my endocrinologist and my GP. And this guy didn't understand what was on the forms, and I kept telling him, but it's on there, because it's been governed by legislation that they are applying as Home Affairs official. And he actually got to a point where he said to me, Mr. Landa, I'm trying to work with you here. And for me that was big, because it meant he read my form and he saw what I was saying in that form. So then he told me that he didn't understand, he didn't know. He's going to speak to his boss. He went behind the scenes, he came back. He was like, okay, cool, we've never had this case before, but this is what the act says. And then we worked together, we put the forms in order together. And he asked me, so can you explain to me, because he was quite curious about who I was and what this journey was, you know, and I explained it to him. And I was quite intrigued. And then we sent the forms to Pretoria, because then they need to go and look at, they need to look at your forms, look at what the doctors have said, and then decide whether or not you are really male or not.
Yeah.
And then he told me it might take 6 to 8 months. In my case, I was very fortunate. It took 8 weeks. I had my new ID. They updated in the births and deaths register. So by the time I went to fetch, so I got an SMS. When I went to fetch my new ID, my female ID wasn't on the system.
Wow.
At all. So they update your birth certificate, everything. And so, yeah, I was very fortunate in terms of getting that right. So the process is, for me, I would advise anyone, start with the name change if you're going to change your name. Because remember, you're dealing with human beings. And some of them have got an opinion. Start with the name change. If you're not going to change the name, get your doctors to write you motivations. Go to a Home Affairs. Preferably go with someone who's quite supportive of who you are, because some people can be very ruthless, and then start that process. And then from there, yeah, the minute your gender marker has changed, you kind of like feel 90% there. Because it doesn't matter what anything else says, because officially, legally, you are recognized as who you are. So that for me was
your first.
I just want to bring it back to the LGBTI community quickly. As you say, it's a very daunting and experience, and the fear of being rejected by people is inevitable. A lot of the LGBT people would argue that transgender people do not belong under the umbrella of LGBTI. What is your response to that?
So I've experienced that a lot as well, especially, the journey for me. I have been a butch lesbian before I got to actually becoming, because I didn't know what was going on. So it was a journey of finding myself. And it's sad that within the community there are gatekeepers, people who know better than others in terms of who you are. And I feel at some point, again, it goes back to humans being ruthless when they choose to, because now that you are safer, you don't want to give someone else space to be who they are. There have been instances in Cape Town where I stay where women who identify as butch lesbians have been quite vocal about their distaste and dislike of transgender men, because, and I quote, you are now becoming these things or these people that violate us. So again, it goes back to human beings not wanting to create a space for everyone to exist and be who they truly are. Ultimately, I do believe being transgender belongs in that umbrella, because it's a journey of becoming who you are, number one. It's not your cisgender, heteronormative, space, which has become the norm in terms of assigned gender at birth. So I believe anyone who falls outside of that spectrum has and should rightfully have a space within the LGBT. Absolutely. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. There's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of self-righteousness in that space. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But definitely, being transgender definitely belongs there.
I just want to say something again as well. But I think this is more when it's male to female transgender. A lot of the times there's a confusion between drag queens and transgender, and it comes down to the point of educating yourself. I've done numerous interviews where people, refer to me as a trans, and I constantly have to, correct people, because there is a massive difference. So I always just say to people, a drag queen is literally a man who creates a character, you know, to live this other life.
Or who expresses themselves differently to what your conventional understanding of a man would, right? Because it's an expression, you know. It's a you living how you feel, but not necessarily what you are. Do you get what I'm saying? Because now, yes, it is what you are. Don't get me wrong. But because we have been indoctrinated as human beings to see either or, it's either black or white, it's either male or female, and that's it. So human beings don't see the beauty that lies between these. And you're right. There's a lot of work that needs to go into to educating, to creating awareness, and that's why people who, like me, who have had the privilege of having an amazing becoming journey, need to tell the story and keep telling the story, so that whoever else needs to hear it and sort of find themselves can do that. Because those who have been privileged enough to live their truth and their authenticity they are people that we can see, we look up to. I mean, when I started my journey, there was no South African that I knew that was transgender. I got to see Shaz Bono, who's an American, you know. So it becomes very important to keep talking and keep telling. Again, though, human beings hear what they want to hear and see what they want to see. You can introduce yourself to someone right now. They will hear you, but they will still take away what they want to hear. Right? I mean, I always say to someone who's meeting me today for the first time, if I introduce myself as Landa, a man, what business do you have of going and saying, oh, but you were born in a female's body? So
exactly.
Do you get what I'm saying? It's not wanting to see and receive the person for who they are. And that needs a lot of work as well.
Are there a lot of support structures in South Africa that have, you know, come to light since the release of your book to help people who are struggling to find their way?
So I think they have been there. The NGOs have been there. But I mean, NGOs sometimes battle to actually do the actual work because of funding and. But what I always do is I try and link people to safe spaces within those communities. So there are a lot of NGOs who've got support groups where you can bring your significant other or your family and you can come and talk it out, you know, because for some family members it takes a while, and you'll find that the individual is not ready to give up on that relationship, so there are safe spaces for them to sit down and talk. So yes, they've always been there. It's just that now it's becoming more sort of well known, I suppose, because there's an actual living example that's put their story out there to say, okay. And I mean, part of the work that I do is to educate, and I mean, I do it even at a university level where I guest lecture, and I link young people to care, because at universities you already have the counseling services, which you shouldn't have to pay for anyway, because it's a primary health care need, right? So in those spaces that I've moved in, it's become easier for young people who do identify as trans to be linked to that care.
Your book has been introduced into universities as a prescribed book. Would you like, or is it a goal for you to get it into a younger educational level? Like, for instance, let's say high school. Because I think there's a lot of confusion for kids,
for young people,
in a secondary education.
And that's when you actually start, I mean, when puberty hits, that's when you start realizing, but hang on, you get told this is what you should be attracted to, or this is how you should act, and you get socialized into specific roles. And that's where, so the goal is definitely to get into high school. I was part of a symposium with Gender Dynamics, which is a transgender organization in Cape Town, that was working on sort of a workbook for life orientation. Because life orientation, until it includes LGBTQI+, then it's not complete. It's not complete. Then it's not preparing a young person for life and for society. So, yeah, my goal is to definitely get it into a younger audience, because, I mean, young people know as young as young, hey?
It's, you know.
So, yeah, that is the ultimate goal.
And please forgive me if it sounds naive as well in terms of my question. So, for me, as a what do you say, young? For myself as a gay guy, I obviously then find myself attracted to another man. When you are going through the transition, what is it then that you would identify as you say my sexual attraction,
sexual orientation,
because we spoke about it lesson. There's the sexual orientation, and then there's also the gender. So what shifts there then for yourself as well on your journey? And I know it differs for everyone.
Yeah.
So
I was about to say it's different for everyone. So there are transgender men who are attracted to other men. So they are gay men because they are male and they are attracted to other men.
Okay.
So they identify as gay men. In my case, I've always loved women a lot.
Okay.
A lot. So I didn't get to a point where I was attracted to men, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, because gender and sex are two different things. And sexual orientation, gender expression, sex expression. So it differs for every single person. You find your pansexual people, you find, your non-binary people who are just attracted to souls and the human regardless of their physical sex. So like any other human reality, it's different for every single human being. I mean, there are human beings who were even in heterosexual marriages, and then years later they realize, actually I'm attracted to the same sex, and and if they allow themselves, then they do that. So it's different for every single person.
So I thank you, because I just wanted, in terms of that as well, it's so important. We're speaking about education constantly, and it is about voicing the opinion and letting us know exactly what happens, because I can in my head say, okay, so if you're becoming a male, that means now you're attracted to a female.
It's an assumption.
You assume.
It's an assumption.
And
I mean, like I said, I was a very butch lesbian, and I was attracted to women, So, and in that space, I was attracted to the same sex, because I hadn't realized that my gender is actually not female. I knew it, but I didn't have the words or to quantify it. So in society, I was same-sex relationships, you understand what I'm saying? And like you say, it's very important to quantify it. And it's important for human beings to stop reducing each other to what we do when we are intimate behind closed doors. And I think the minute human beings can stop that, then we can start seeing each other as humans first. Because that is what causes a lot of phobias, a lot of prejudice. We look at people and then we think, oh, this is how they have sex. And then we kind of like write them off based on that, which says a lot about who we are. It means we look at people and we reduce them.
And again, that is a personal journey.
It
It has
nothing
nothing to do with anybody.
Exactly. It has nothing to do with the next person.
Yeah.
So, Landa, I just want to go back to what you said about our constitution. You were saying how beautiful it is, and how it's there to support us in the LGBTQI plus community. My thing that I've thought about was, does our system take care of trans people? And the reason I ask that is because, let's say, for example, I'm a person who's transitioning and I get locked up in a cell. Do I get put into either women's or men's prison? And why do I not have my own cell? Because I fear for my safety.
So you're right. Practically, it doesn't work for the layperson. So if you were a person who identified as transgender and you could afford to call your lawyer within 2 seconds of you being arrested, then you're fine, because your lawyer is going to come and intervene for you. But if you are a normal human being who battles with access to our legal resources, then you're going to battle. They will actually, the police who are entrusted to actually implement and uphold the law will belittle you. They will make fun of you. I actually write about an incident where I had to be put in a holding cell. And because I was passing so well as male, even before my surgeries, they put me in a male cell, but I couldn't say anything. Because they are very notorious for humiliating people who are queer, and they would have probably, in all probability, made sure that those males that I was with in that cell violated me.
Yeah,
So the police are
add fuel to the fire, and make the
police are
situation
very
way
known for
worse.
that. I do know that there are organizations. For an example, I can single out the Triangle organization in Cape Town, which has done extensive work with police officers. It's very difficult because, again, the language, it's language that is foreign to a lot of people. So, for an example, in my language, which is Xhosa, we don't even have pronouns. So when you are trying to explain to a Xhosa police officer what a he and a she is and how that doesn't align to it's a very confusing thing. But at least they are doing the work. But there's a long way to go, because for the average trans person who's out wherever, who might need someone's intervention in terms of being arrested, because human beings do get arrested. I mean, we stay in a society where it will happen. They won't get access to that. And when the police find out, they will probably make a joke of it and allow you to be victimized, because it gives them power. You know how human beings are with power. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So on paper, our constitution is amazing. But in terms of working practically for the person who needs it, the layest of the lay person, it doesn't work. That's the sad thing.
That is scary. And where can one get a copy of Becoming Him?
So Becoming Him is available online. It's on Take a Lot. It's on Loot. It's also on Amazon and also at exclusive books across the country.
Okay, one last question. What's the big misperception about being trans?
So the biggest is that you were probably dropped out of the sky. You weren't born of being human, and that you probably just woke up one day and decided that you are not comfortable in the sex or gender you were assigned, and therefore you want to change yourself. That's the biggest one. Why do you want to change yourself? Why would you want to do this to yourself? But there again, it's human beings fail to realize everything that we are is mapped onto us after we are born. Nobody is born male, nobody is born female. You are born a human, you are assigned gender at birth, you are given a name, you are given a surname, you are given everything secondary to that moment. And when you do choose to be who you are, then human beings have a problem with that. So I think it's important for human beings to have human conversations, see the human first, before any label, be it gender, be it sex, be it, whatever category. See the human first, and then we can start breaking those binaries and those misconceptions and misunderstandings about what it means to be a human being.
I think media plays a very big part, in educating people. And I think some people who have a very big social media following tend to abuse it, and not necessarily for the positive. A very good example would be Charlize Theron's 3-year-old child who now, identifies as trans, and a very big South African singer who, has tweeted her and expressed his personal views on this.
No, we must call him out.
Steve Hofmeyer, how dare you? What is your personal opinion on that?
So I think what Steve Hofmeyer is abusing the privilege. That's what privilege can do, eh? Because he's been privileged enough to be who he is, where he is. He could use it for the greater good. He chooses not to. We know that from racial interactions between South Africans as it is. So how much more for someone who is supporting their child in terms of becoming and finding who they are. So, excuse my French, screw Steve Hofmeyer. He always stands for the wrong things. And I'm happy that all of these big sponsors pulled out of that show that he was going to have. But to Charlize, that's what power does when used for the greater good. Whether she understands her child or not is not for her to decide. What is for her and what she's doing is she's showing the beauty of being there from one human to another. And I think what she's doing is going to go a very long way in terms of history to show her character as well. I mean, this woman left this country and went to be big overseas, but she still identifies as that Afrikaans girl from Joburg,
Yeah.
And I admire what she's doing. It can't be easy. It can't be easy, but it's amazing for the child, because however the child develops or becomes, that child will know that my mother is in my corner.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we all look forward to in life. To have that one or two people that say, whatever's going on with you, whoever you are, we are here. And don't look back. So yeah, big ups to Charlize. Steve Hofmeyer can go to bed.
Yeah.
Landa, thank you again so much for joining us on the couch for WQMD. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for being an inspiration. Thank you for being brave, and thank you for telling your stories. And I really hope that your message will still change a lot of lives.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Seriously.
Trans matters in SA and the world still have a lot of obstacles to overcome. Some will say, let's agree to disagree. But we really can't. Because by disagreeing with the validity of someone's identity and the services that they deserve or don't deserve is discrimination and not a disagreement. WQMD and Forever Resorts Loskop Dam would love to give you and 3 friends the chance to win a weekend getaway to the breathtaking resort in the Loskop Valley situated in Mpumalanga. All you have to do, like WQMD's pages on all social media platforms, tag 3 friends in the comment section below, and share this episode. It's that easy. Come out, step up, and live your life with WQMD and Forever Resorts Loskop Dam.